the only Jay Scott from the BiggerPockets Business Podcast. And Jay, of course, you have a lot of notoriety as well with your company, Scott Built. Thank you so much for joining us on The Thoughtful Entrepreneur.
Oh, my pleasure. So glad to be here. Thanks, Josh.
First off, I have to say thank you so much. It was truly one of the greatest honors of my history of doing what I do in being invited to be on the BiggerPockets Business Podcast. And so that was a few months ago. If you go back and subscribe right now, because I can tell you that listening to Jay and Carol, you guys are like professional broadcasters. At least we run the show very, very well.
Thank you. We're only about 25 episodes in, so we have a whole lot to learn, but it's great. It was great interviewing you. I mean, when you interview somebody that makes it easy for us, we look good because you guys make us look good.
I have one of those strings on my back with a little ring, and you could pull it, and then I just go right through it.
I've noticed that people that are used to being on the other side of the microphone, that are used to hosting podcasts, make the best guests because they just make it so easy.
Excellent. Yeah, for sure. Well, all right. So there you go. There's the standard you need to hit. So Jay, kind of starting off, talk about how you got into starting Scott Built. You're the partner and co-founder of Scott Built.
Yeah. So my wife and I are co-founders, partners. We've been partners in the real estate business and all of our investments for about 11 years now. We met back in 2006 in Silicon Valley. We were both in the tech world. I was working at Microsoft. She was at eBay. We were both doing the working 80 hours a week. She was traveling literally 3.5 weeks a month. I was traveling 2 weeks a month. And so we realized that once we decided to get married, there was no way that was going to be sustainable. We couldn't start a family and raise a family with both of us working the way we were. So in spring of 2008, we decided to get married. It was about a 5-minute conversation where we decided, hey, we need to just leave our jobs. We need to go start something else where we can put family first, lifestyle first. So we moved to Atlanta in summer of 2008, which those that were paying attention back then was the height or the bottom of the big recession. Real estate market had gotten absolutely crushed. We moved to Atlanta, which is probably one of the worst hit cities in the country. But somehow, it's a long story that doesn't really matter, but somehow we fell into real estate. We ended up deciding to flip a couple houses while we were waiting to figure out what we wanted that next business to be. And after flipping a couple of houses, we realized, well, wait a second, we're pretty good at this. And we've actually figured out how to navigate this tough market. So after 3 or 4 or 5 houses, we said, well, maybe this is going to be our next venture. So we kind of devoted our lives full-time, or our professional lives full-time to real estate starting in 2008. And here we are 11 years later. We've done about 500 transactions, done about 300. We've done about 300 flips. We've done rentals, multifamily, notes, mobile homes, lending, syndications, a little bit of everything.
That's amazing. So how did you not screw it up in that very first one that you did, or second one or third one? Did you spend a lot of time just being a student and just studying and analyzing everything? Obviously you took action at some point.
So that's a big presumption that we didn't screw up.
Well, you didn't screw up bad enough that you stopped. We'll say it that way.
Well, I always half joke, and it's actually, there's probably it's more serious than joking. We were very lucky that we bought our first 3 houses in the first 2 weeks that we started. Because had we not done that, had we bought our first house and waited to see how that went before we bought any more, we likely never would have bought number 2 or 3 or 50 or 100, because that first house was a big learning experience for us. We made essentially every mistake in the book. We overpaid for the property. We underestimated the repair costs. We underestimated the amount of time it would take to sell the property. We overestimated the amount we could sell the property for. At the end of the day, we listed the property too high. It didn't sell. We ended up renting it. We put in a lease purchase buyer. 2.5 years later, they left the place in the middle of the night, trashed. So we did a second rehab 2.5 years later. And finally, after 3 years, we eventually sold that first property. Now, luckily, we had done about 50, 60, 70 properties in the meantime. So we knew what we were doing by the time we did that second rehab. The market helped us a little bit. Things were a little bit better. But the fact that we had always been tremendously conservative, I'm a very conservative person when it comes to investments and numbers. The fact that we were tremendously conservative, we were able to make all of those mistakes, pretty much every mistake you can imagine on that first deal. And we still walked away with a profit, a very small profit. It was about $1,200, but profit nonetheless.
So you say you're fairly conservative, yet I think that there's some people, when they hear that you did 3 properties in 2 weeks, that sounds like, okay, I can't even identify with that kind of activity.
That was probably the biggest risk we've taken in this business, starting out with 3 properties before we really had a business model, before we really knew what we were doing. But when I say conservative, I mean, I spent a long time figuring out how to analyze deals, how to look at the numbers. I've always been somebody, I managed businesses back in the corporate world. So for me, the numbers and understanding the business model and understanding the analysis of the investment, that's what I'm good at. So, luckily, we were more accurate on our numbers for the second and third property. But again, we weren't so far off on the first property that even though it took a long time, we were able to make all those mistakes and we still walked away with a small profit. So I tell anybody that's getting into any type of investing, but especially real estate, it's hard to lose a lot of money. You have to make a lot of mistakes to lose a lot of money. And as long as you're fairly conservative, you should be able to walk away from that first project, even if you make a lot of mistakes, with a little bit of a profit or worst case break even. So there's not as much risk in real estate as a lot of people think.
So flipping real estate, how accessible do you think that this is to the average person?
Certainly things have gotten tougher over the last 10 years. We're at the point in the economic cycle here. This interview, for anybody that might be watching it months or years in the future, we're in the fall of 2019. The economic cycle is certainly, we're nearing a peak, or we're at a peak. Some would say we might even be a little bit over the peak. But things are a lot tougher than they were a few years ago. But what I always like to say is, when it comes to real estate, there's never a perfect time to buy. It's either going to be easy to buy and difficult to sell, or it's going to be difficult to buy and easy to sell. Back when we started in 2008, it was easy to buy. We could literally throw a dart at the MLS, and whatever it hit was probably going to be a really, really cheap deal. It's probably going to be a great deal. But the difficulty was on reselling it. There weren't a lot of buyers out there. The buyers couldn't get financing. So selling was the difficult part. Here we are in 2019, and selling's easy. Basically, you put it out there and you're going to have 10 offers in the first weekend, but the buying part's difficult. So at any point in the market cycle, you're going to find it's either going to be difficult to buy or it's going to be difficult to sell. So you just have to get really good at both sides of the equation. You have to get really good at the marketing on the sale, on the purchase side, finding deals, being able to market for deals, and you have to get really good at the marketing and sales on the back end. And if you can do both of those things, wherever we are in the market cycle, you should be okay.
What if we're just kind of, as you say, kind of over the precipice, and what if we start going into it's crashing down, but it's a process that might take 6, 12, 18 months, for, the market continue to fall like that? Is it kind of was like, well, this is where we maybe take a little time off, because if you buy something now, you're going to lose money on it. If you don't hustle on that deal and get that out the door. I mean, what would you do in that kind of an economic situation?
Yeah, I have a lot of these discussions today. That's the big question. And what I would suggest for anybody that isn't experienced in flipping houses, sitting on the sidelines, taking the next couple months, couple years, however long it takes before we actually see that downturn and the correction, take that time and use it as an opportunity to learn. Use it as an opportunity to read, to study, to follow other investors, and be prepared when the market is more cooperative for flipping houses. Now, for those that have flipped houses in the past that may have a little bit more experience, there are certainly things that we can be doing at this point in the market cycle. So the things that we're doing in our business, and we're still flipping, some of the things that we're doing, one, we're keeping projects quick. Like you said, it can take 3, 6, 9, 12 months to complete a deal. We're not doing any of the projects that would typically take 6, 9, or 12 months anymore. We're not doing any new construction or new development. We're not doing any projects that require long lead times for permits. We're not doing things that are like adding square footage or adding a second floor. We're basically focused on those deals that we can be in and out of in 3 months. So that way, if the market does start to turn, hopefully it's not a crash in a short period of time. Hopefully it's a more a linear or more gradated downturn. And so by the time we're out of a deal or ready to get out of a deal, we haven't lost all of our profit.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then the other thing I tell people is 2008 was probably the worst market we're likely to see for a while.
Yeah.
Certainly it could be worse, but I like to use 2008 as kind of a benchmark for worst case scenario. So what I tell people is look at what happened in your area back in 2008 and assume that's your worst case scenario in 2019 or 2020. So we've done a lot of flips in Maryland, and in Maryland on average, market dropped about 16%. The real estate market in the areas where we're flipping in Maryland dropped about 16% back in 2008. So what I like to tell people is if you're flipping in that market, make sure that your profit margins are at least 16%.
There you go.
So that way, if we see the worst case scenario, the 2008 scenario, we basically wipe away all our profit, but we don't necessarily go negative on our deals.
Yeah. Now, Orlando, on the other hand, I believe a little bit more than 16%.
we are very conservative in Florida. The biggest thing to get hit during a downturn is tourism. So any tourism areas, if you're in San Diego or Las Vegas or Orlando or other parts of Florida, you're very susceptible to getting hit hard during a downturn. So I tell people in those areas, be much, much more conservative, or now's a good time to be sitting on the sidelines.
Nice. Okay. So you and Carol are doing a lot of properties. And then at some point you decide, maybe we should help others with this. Maybe we should educate other people with this. Maybe we should put our learnings into a book, that sort of thing. Explain what gave you the audacity to think that you could now become an expert?
So it's funny. I don't think of myself as an expert, or at least I didn't. But I've always loved teaching. And back in 2008, about 3 months before we bought our first property, maybe 6 months before we bought our first property, I started a blog called 123flip.com, where I decided I was going to chronicle my first project or my first projects, basically the nitty gritty details, like down to the penny, videos, pictures, architectural drawings, so that people that were interested in potentially flipping houses could learn from all the mistakes we were making, learn from this, but hopefully some of the successes we were having, could follow along. It was basically an accountability item for me. It was something that, hey, people are seeing me say, I'm going to go flip a house, and it forces me to actually do it because I'm writing a blog every day and people are relying on me to keep the forward momentum going. So I ended up chronicling over the next couple of years, my first 50 deals. And each of these deals, literally down to the penny, pictures, videos, successes, failures. Every day I would write 1 or 2 blog posts, and it was quite an undertaking, but I love it because it was an opportunity for me to analyze my business, to analyze my deals, to figure out what we were doing right, what we were doing wrong. And what I found was between 2008 and 2012, I got a very large readership for that blog. And people were very appreciative of all the information we were sharing, because back then a lot of house flippers didn't want to go into their nitty gritty financial details. They just kind of wanted to gloss over things. And so we weren't scared to share our mistakes and all the things we were doing wrong and all the things we were learning. So I was getting a ridiculous amount of email, phone calls, requests to go to lunch, to grab coffee. I'm a tremendous introvert. And people hear me on the podcast or meet me in places, and I do a good job of trying to hide that. But it's really hard for me to take phone calls and do lunches. And my wife is great at that. Carol's fantastic at that. But it's hard for me to talk to strangers. So in 2012, Carol suggested, so you have all this information. People want all this information in a nice, organized fashion. Instead of going to lunch and talking to people on the phone, why don't you write a book? And so you can tell people, here's the information. And it was never a money-making opportunity for me. It was never, hey, I'm an expert. I want to be an author. I want to be a recognized expert in this field. It was really, I just want people to stop calling me and asking me to go to lunch. So in 2012, I wrote a book. One of the chapters ended up being really, really long. So that ended up being a second book. So in 2012, I wrote 2 books. I released that at the beginning of 2013, and things just kind of blew up, and people loved the books. And I'm now on my 5th book. We've sold over 200,000 copies. 3 of them have been bestsellers on Amazon. And so it really was accidental. I never intended to try and be an authority or an expert. But one of the things I found is that just by sharing information, just by trying to give back as much as I can, I've had a lot of attention come to me as well. So it's been a good two-way street.
So for someone who's got Amazon open right now, what are the titles of those books?
Yeah, so the book on flipping houses was my, I guess, seminal work, if you want to call it that. It sounds funny to call it that. But the book on flipping houses is probably what I'm best known for. The book on estimating rehab costs, the book on negotiating real estate, which I wrote with my wife, Carol, and my most recent book, which is all about economic cycles and how to invest in throughout the economic cycle, called Recession-Proof Real Estate Investing.
And I would imagine on your website, you've got an index to all of those. What is that website?
Yeah, it's jscott.com. So I finally splurged earlier this year, and I've been trying to negotiate the purchase of jscott.com, just the letter J, scott.com, for about 2 years now. And finally, I just splurged and bought it. So you can find out more about me in the books there.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on owning your name.
Thank you.
With the process of writing a book, did that come easy for you?
I'm an engineer by trade and by education and by mindset. So I write very much like an engineer. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people appreciate. And again, I don't take credit for it because I couldn't do it differently if I wanted to. But I think a lot of people appreciate that a lot of real estate books out there are written as more narratives, they're stories, they're motivational. I have trouble writing in that style with stories and making things motivational. I write like an engineer. So I write like a textbook. And I think that there was a gap in the real estate education market, in the book market, for textbook type pieces of work. And so for me, I literally sat down and I mapped it out like a textbook. There's 20 chapters in my flipping book, and each chapter is the next step in the process. There's basically 20 steps in getting to your first flip deal and getting through your first flip deal. And so the book is written as essentially as a step-by-step how-to guide. I've had some people who have said, yeah, you need more stories, you need more motivation. But for the most part, people have been like, this is exactly what I want. This is a no fluff step-by-step. And so that's what I'm good at. And so I've kind of found my niche in writing real estate textbook type things.
So from there, how did you get connected with BiggerPockets?
I actually started with BiggerPockets in 2008. I joined before I ever did my first deal. I used the community the same way most people do, to learn how to flip houses, to learn how to do real estate deals, to learn how to analyze deals. And again, I love giving back. I love writing about what I'm doing. I love using my failures and my mistakes to teach other people. So in addition to my blog that I started in 2008, I started documenting a lot of my deals on BiggerPockets. I would write basically posts about the mistakes I was making on a daily basis. I would chronicle the deals on BiggerPockets. And so I became very much a part of that community. I became friends with the founder, Josh Dorkin, back in 2009. And I was a business guy. And so I wasn't a real estate guy. So when Josh found out that I was contributing so much and I was a business guy, he said, hey, I'd love to talk to you more about the site. So I helped him with some of the CTO type responsibilities on the site early on. And I was kind of his sounding board for a few years, and we became really good friends. 2012, after I'd written the books, I said to Josh, hey, I have these 2 books. I'm getting ready to self-publish them. How about BiggerPockets publishing them? And he said, interesting. I said, in fact, I don't see why BiggerPockets doesn't publish a whole lot of books. I'll start writing a lot of books for BiggerPockets. And so that was kind of the incarnation of the BiggerPockets publishing brand.
Oh my gosh. So, wow. And then at some point then a conversation came about that BiggerPockets should expand and offer a business podcast. And how did that come about?
Yeah, so BiggerPockets launched their real estate podcast back in 2013, maybe. Joshua Dorkin, Brandon Turner, anybody that's in real estate probably knows those two names. They founded a podcast back in 2013, which is the biggest real estate podcast on the planet. It is one of the top 50 most popular of all podcasts on the planet. They've had 65 million downloads over the last 6 years. It's just absolutely fantastic, just an amazing resource. In 2018, BiggerPockets decided to launch their second podcast, which was BiggerPockets Money. And I think you're probably familiar with that one with Mindy Jensen and Scott Trench. And so that was a great success and great podcast. And then in 2018, they approached me and asked if I would do a podcast. We talked for a little while, and I didn't really want to do anything that was real estate related. I felt like I had talked a lot about real estate, and I was ready to talk about something else. So they asked what I would like to talk about. And I said, I'd like to talk about business, because as real estate investors, we're also business owners. And too often we don't think about the business side of real estate investing. We think of ourselves as we do deals, but we don't just do deals. We run a business. And in many ways, a real estate business is no different than any other business that has any other type of inventory, a restaurant selling shoes, selling clothes, whatever it is. Basically, it's just that houses and property are inventory. So I said, I'd love to do a podcast that talks more about being a business owner, being an entrepreneur, running a business, growing, scaling a business. They thought it was a good idea. My wife was really excited about it, and they said we'd love to have her as well. So in April or May of 2019, this year, Carol and I launched the BiggerPockets Business Podcast, and we basically talked to both entrepreneurs and experts in business. And so you were one of our expert guests, obviously, and great episode. But we've talked to a whole lot of fantastic entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, big entrepreneurs, and just hear their stories and get their actionable tips on how our listeners can build and scale and grow their businesses.
So Jay, aside from the BiggerPockets podcast, obviously you're still doing a lot of work with Scott Built. Are you comfortable in sharing your other project yet, or is that still behind the curtain?
No, I think I know what you're talking about. So this is more Carol's project, but Carol has been talking for a few years about launching what's called a concierge brokerage, which is basically a traditional real estate brokerage, but they also, the brokers also help with the design side and the construction side and staging, and basically a full service brokerage for somebody that wants to not just buy or sell a house, but also do some work, renovate, and get top dollar. So she just, and with your help as well, she just launched her concierge brokerage, Scott Silver Concierge Realty, here in Sarasota, Florida, just about 2 weeks ago. And we're just getting that off the ground, but that's a really exciting venture for her, and I'm helping her out there.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Well, Jay Scott, again, partner, co-founder of Scott Built with his lovely wife, Carol. By the way, if you ever get the chance to meet Jay and Carol, you guys are just magnetic. Very, very, very cool couple. I'm so grateful that we met in person at Podcast Movement. Of course, co-host again with Carol of the BiggerPockets Business Podcast, and then of course we'll give a shout out to Carol and it was Scott Silver. Right.
Yep. Console.
And what's the website? There's a website.
Yep. It's scottsilverrealty.com.
Nice. All right. Jay Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Josh, thanks so much for having me on. This was awesome.